It's off and we are good. Good morning, everyone. It is Triumph Tuesday, the second, we're into the official second month of 2023. We are so excited. We've got our first guest of 2023, but we're going to actually chat because what we're going to chat about, what she's going to share with us, has to do with some triumphing over down there. That's all I'm going to say. But good morning. It's Carol Sue, aka Naughty Boss Live with two.
Good morning, everyone. This is Janice, aka Wellness Diva 5.0. And yes, of course, 2023, we're in our second week, and we are so excited because we have our first guest on. And I'm not going to waste any more time. I want to introduce to this TwoSistas family and welcome the amazing Antonella Dewell. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Yes, great pronunciation.
So I know, for instance, that you coach specifically women as it relates to IBS issues and the gut imbalances, but I really believe, perhaps we should start at the beginning because we've all heard of IBS. Some of us may even have it. And what I didn't realize is that there is a disorder, but there's also a disease. So can you educate not only myself, but perhaps someone listening or who may be viewing this video?
Absolutely. That's a really great place to start because IBS can easily be confused with IBD. The acronyms are so close to each other. So it's great to really make that distinction. So whereas IBD, which is inflammatory bowel disease, it's really a disease of the gut where you can see some physiological changes. You can see inflammation and damage to the gut after doing blood tests and perhaps some scoping. IBS is really it's called a disorder of the gut-brain interaction of the brain axis. So whereas there may not be anything that looks wrong with the gut after all of these investigations, the gut is just not functioning the way it should. And so people experience symptoms like bloating after a big meal or excess sensation of trapped gas after eating certain foods. Or changes in their motility and where the bowels could be moving a little bit too fast or too slow. And perhaps even some abdominal pain or cramps. So whereas it's considered a chronic condition that cannot be cured, it can really be managed, and the symptoms can be managed to the point where they no longer fit the criteria of being classified as IBS. So that's a silver lining.
So my question would be, because obviously I think a lot of people, at least from my perspective, because I do know quite a few people that suffer that, what would be like the thing that, or the major, like, I don't know if there's a number 1, 2, 3 causes of someone, because I don't know, are you born with it or there's some outside forces that we can really connect the dots to why someone would get it?
Yeah, absolutely.
To prevent them from like, okay, might be happening, don't do it, so you won't get it.
Very good question. So it's still a bit of a big mystery as to what really causes IBS, but research has identified some potential causes. So there's definitely a genetic component. It does tend to run in the families, but there may be other factors such as, for example, a bout of gastroenteritis. For many people, that's one of the more obvious causes. So whereas most of us will recover fully after a day or two, some people don't fully recover and experience these symptoms long term. There's another potential cause is some imbalance in the gut bacteria. People with IBS tend to have a different makeup of bacteria, so to speak, than people who don't have IBS. So that's thought to be one of the potential causes. And there is what's called visceral hypersensitivity. So simply put, the gut of people with IBS are overly sensitive. So some normal things like just eating a much bigger meal than usual, or eating some gassy vegetables can lead to and trigger these painful and life-disrupting symptoms.
So then it would be obviously really advantageous of somebody, and I'm kind of like giggling about the topic, not that's, believe me, it's not a funny topic, people, but somehow TwoSistas always talks about the shitter. I'm going to go ahead and just, because we do that. But, it seems like there are probably triggers, and you would think some of those triggers, obviously you're saying food, but, we also often talk about the bacteria in the gut. And a lot of people don't realize that we also have good bacteria in the gut. And to me, it would seem to be like, because you just mentioned that, maybe there could be, because there's an imbalance, meaning that there's more bad bacteria versus the good, to kind of combat that.
Yes, or simply just a different makeup. Microbiome research is still really at its infancy at the beginning. So there is a lot we still don't understand. So we can't really pinpoint exactly what our gut microbiome should look like. But there just seems to be a difference, absolutely.
Wow. And, which leads me kind of to a question. Well, I have a lot of questions that are popping in my head right now. So obviously we know there's the good bacteria, the bad bacteria. I would assume, but I don't want to assume, but I would assume that if you're eating those or consuming those foods, or maybe even liquids that kind of trigger all that to happen, do some of your clients finally realize that, for instance, that maybe they shouldn't have it's people call Tuesdays Taco Tuesdays. Maybe they shouldn't have that taco, because as soon as they eat it, everything starts to disrupt in their gut brain.
Like a volcano.
Yeah. So that points to the larger destruction of what is really triggering your IBS, and that's really different for every person. There are these, major factors, like most people will point to food, certain foods, or diet in general as their major trigger. But it's also important to know that that's not the only trigger. Stress is another big one. And, other aspects of lifestyle, exercise, whether, or lack of thereof, or what kind of exercise, whether you sleep enough, whether you have enough good quality sleep. But going back to your, taco example, it is important for people to really figure out which foods are triggering their IBS, because there are no two people who are triggered by the same foods. So, and this is really a very, very individual, kind of discovery process. So that, once you also know which foods you need to reduce, if not eliminate. Many times it's really just a matter of portion sizes. It's not like you need to completely avoid certain foods for the rest of your life, but you understand how much you can have of certain foods without triggering those symptoms, so that you can ultimately, have a very balanced diet with a lot of variety of foods that ultimately will, make your gut healthier.
Now, is there a certain food? I mean, because we obviously know that, there are certain people that are triggered by certain, gassy, there's a lot of gassy vegetables, gassy spices, there are even some meats people can't, but is there a food group and or a food that you would recommend that, say, maybe to help calm that gut from doing that, if in fact that's, maybe the main factor for some? Like you said, stress, you throw out so many great things that people probably wouldn't even associate would be associated with, I would never think stress would have anything to do with IBS. But that's a great point. Is there a food specifically they say, as I know, like specifically with if you're having a urinary tract infection, whatever, they say cranberry juice, there's certain things. So would there be any food that would kind of calm that colon a little bit?
I think I'd like to bring back first the idea of the trigger foods. So
Okay.
It's really important to figure out there isn't really, I mean, there are many foods that can calm the gut, and we can talk about those.
Sure.
But what is important for every person with IBS to figure out which foods are triggering the symptoms. And there are, researcher really identifies some classes of foods rather than individual foods, but classes of foods that really are responsible for triggering the symptoms. And you and maybe your listener may or may have not heard of the research done by Monash University in Australia years ago that's been then replicated all over the world, basically, that identified some groups of food that they coined this term FODMAP to identify, which is an acronym, and it stands for, it's quite of a mouthful, fermentable oligosaccharide, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. But what they are is basically, I know, it took me a while to actually get that rolling off my tongue.
God bless you. That is a mouthful.
But it's simply put, it's just a group of sugars and fibers that are really rapidly fermented by the gut. And by doing so, they trigger the distension of the gut, the sensation of bloating, of trapped gas, and this, gut motility changes. This research was pivotal, really, in figuring out these potential triggers. And what they did is that they really came up with a protocol that really helps people with IBS figure out their individual foods, trigger foods. So I'll give you some example. Some of these complicated sugars and fibers are simply things like fructose in many fruits, so vegetables, lactose in the milk, yogurt, and ice cream. Certain fibers that are in certain beans and lentils or vegetables or grains like wheat and barley. Certain fruits like peaches, apples, pears, mangoes, or vegetables like onions and garlic, asparagus, cauliflower. So there is a lot of foods. But the good news is that, not everybody is sensitive to all of them. In fact, every person can figure out, there may be like just one of these groups, or maybe there's a couple of groups. And as I mentioned, they can identify how much they can have without, triggering.
So the portion amount is also key in really figuring out. Now, why is it? Because did you say that mostly women get it and men don't? Why would that be?
Yeah, that's actually, the demographics of IBS is 2 out of 3 people with IBS is actually women. And it's pretty prevalent. 10 to 15% of people in the US suffer with this disorder.
That's 2 things. They don't get IBS and they don't get PMS. What is going on around here?
Oh my gosh. I just want to take a sidebar for just a moment and welcome all of our listeners on the Wisdom Audio app. Thank you so much for being here. Antonella, what is, as you just mentioned, it seems like IBS is a disorder mainly for women. What are some different tips that they can do? Would you maybe suggest keeping a food journal, or like how does all that start when somebody notices like, hey, something is not right here, like your body's talking to you?
Very, very good question.
A second part to that, like when you're saying the journaling, which is perfect, is there like I don't want to say a specific time, but when would someone, because I'm wondering, they may, when we're talking about journaling, they may not even associate that, because maybe the reaction happens later. Does the reaction happen fairly instantly?
No, yeah, and it is quite, it's quite a process, and it's not so easy to identify, you know, the triggers. But going back to Jenny's question, I think the first step of noticing, you know, starting to keep a food journal, also a food and symptom journal. So noticing when the symptoms come about, that in on of itself won't help you really figure out your trigger foods, but it can help you figure out some patterns, so that then you can, you know, when you go to your doctor, you can, you know, have some data basically to present. That's really going to help them in helping you figure out whether it is IBS. Because the very first step would really be talking to the doctor, starting with a primary doctor. They may refer you to a gastroenterologist for tests if necessary, because the symptoms of IBS are actually really common symptoms to many other disorders, like inflammatory bowel disease that we, you know, mentioned earlier. There's only one way or a few ways that our gut talks to us, right? And it's through the symptoms, the bloating, the pain, the changes in bowel movements. So it's important to really get a clear diagnosis, because the diagnosis will inform the treatment. And then if it is IBS, you know, there's different things that you can do, including some medical management, but especially, you know, lifestyle and dietary changes can help you in figure out those trigger foods, and help you reduce the symptoms. Now, your question is that, when do the symptoms appear? Do they appear right away? How can you actually figure out? The research that I mentioned just earlier really outline a specific protocol that's now really recommended by most gastroenterologists and gastroenterological associations for people to really reduce their symptoms, first of all, find relief, and then figure out their trigger foods. And it's a very, I like to call it a detective work. It's a process of elimination and reintroduction. Right. You really need to do with someone who specializes in a dietitian who specializes in this protocol, because it's not very intuitive, and it's really hard to do it on your own. But basically what you do is that you first reduce all of these foods that I had mentioned, that go under that acronym, that are potentially triggering the symptom. And what happens is, for most people with IBS, they feel a lot better when they reduce this food. Now, the key is that this is just temporary, because that's just the first step to identify the trigger foods. As I mentioned, not everybody is sensitive to all of this. So right. You shouldn't be eliminating all of these foods for long term, or God forbid, for the rest of your life. They're very healthy foods. So then you introduce each one of these groups, like the fructose or the lactose or the galacto-oligosaccharides, the polyols, one by one. So that's what allows you, and that's the time when you really keep a very good detailed journal of your symptoms. But because you're only reintroducing one of these foods at a time, then you can really identify it. And so at the end of this process, which is a bit of a long process, then you can reintroduce all of these foods that didn't really trigger your symptoms, and only maybe reduce the quantities, or perhaps in a few cases eliminate one or two foods that really seem to be triggering those symptoms. And you end up having a much more balanced, varied diet. And it's a lot easier also to eat with other people, right? Eat at family functions, dinners, restaurants, birthday parties, and enjoy food and eat with confidence, so that you're not afraid of eating anymore, because you're not afraid, since you don't know, what is causing your symptoms, you can eat with confidence, knowing that just avoiding or reducing certain foods, you can remain symptom free.
And I think too that mindset, we know, like, even anyone that suffers allergies, and to me, this really sounds like an allergy to that gut that is disturbing the whole process of digestion and giving you that pain, that you do have to also go through that same kind of process, introducing different things to kind of figure out, is that the one? And I think the key piece is we live in such a society that's, I gotta know now, I have to have an instant thing. And that, I think, is part of the mindset issue with, like, you do have to take care because it may be a food that you truly, truly absolutely enjoy the flavor, the taste, maybe the season of when it comes out. But at the same time, you got to come to terms with, well, gee, that may be something that is, although it is yummy and it tastes good going down, my gut just doesn't like it. So I would imagine that there's also that kind of that mindset that goes in there, that they got to understand that and take the time, the necessary time, to be patient with your body. And like you said, really calculate. I like the piece about the portion control, because we also live in a supersized world. We know that, which is not healthy and not good. And a lot of times that is a great avenue that you can still enjoy that food group, but just a smaller amount.
Absolutely. Yes. Unfortunately, there is no quick fix, for this. It is a process, and it is a series of changes in your diet and your lifestyle. But it's very rewarding and very, once you figure out which foods you are, you not only you feel a lot better, but you sort of had this control over your body that before you didn't. A lot of my clients tell me that they don't have confidence in their body because they can't trust it, basically. The famous sentence, trust your gut. Well, don't tell that to somebody with IBS because they can't. But this process gives them that confidence of what foods they can eat, so they don't end up, unnecessarily restricting their diet or avoiding foods they don't need to avoid, and going down that rabbit hole of more and more food restriction. And also, even when they figure out, let's say, I don't know, I can't tolerate too much fructose in one sitting, that's not always forever. So one thing that we discovered by all of this research is that tolerance to these foods can change over time. So IBS is a chronic relapsing diseases. So it comes and goes, and a lot of these factors like stress and other things can influence this. But as you start reintroducing more foods, you feed more, foods to your gut. That gut imbalance that we talked about could be changing. And we're starting to understand that could also be a reason for, the changes in the foods that you can tolerate. So I always tell my clients, okay, you figure out that maybe garlic doesn't agree with you that much. Maybe avoid it for a little bit, but then 3 or 6 months from now, try it again. You may be surprised, and you may actually. So it's a constant, discovery, and I say never. So you can always enjoy more and more foods.
And which leads me to my next question. We all want to enjoy food. And by the way, my favorite F word is food. As it is for many people. What are some different ways that people can create a different type of gut-pleasing, maybe recipes? Like maybe they have a favorite recipe that they can redesign or reconfigure? So
there's no one answer to this question, because again, it depends on your own personal tolerance. It depends on on the food group that you're intolerant to. So
right. Garlic, you can't replace garlic.
Yeah, actually, I was just thinking of that as an example because
I love garlic. God help
most
me.
people love garlic, and they really, are sad when they figure out that they may not be able to have as much as they used to. But you can use other things like garlic, infused olive oil or other oil that have been infused with garlic. So with some of these foods, it's important not to have the solid part, but if you infuse it in oil, because these fibers that I mentioned, these FODMAPs are not soluble in oil, you can still get flavor. So for example, you could take a clove of garlic and you could saute in some oil, then you remove it, and then you can still enjoy the flavor, in whatever dish you're cooking with that oil, without having the components of the garlic that trigger your gut symptoms.
Great idea. Great idea. I mean, and that's a good thing is there's compromise. It's a whole learning process. It's really rediscovering maybe a new way, like you said, of cooking something or, like if onions is one of your things that, and you like, say, the feel of it, or even the raw onion, the crunch of it, maybe celery would be a good replacement. So I mean, there I think are ways, and it's really about kind of reinventing it almost. To me, it's kind of a new experience of like, I'm going to really try different things and see if I can come up with that same satisfaction of that flavor of that season, whatever it may be, but also being mindful. Who wants to put their gut through all that? Like the pain, the bloating, like you said, the insecurity of a lifestyle, going out to dinner or going over to a friend's house, and that is the most unpleasant experience. You're like, okay, get me home, baby. I gotta go. I gotta run. And it does really impact someone's lifestyle, when they're going out or visiting.
Yeah. And these are very, life disrupting symptoms. I hear, every day from my clients things like, some people are afraid of leaving the house because they don't know where they'll find the next bathroom, or they won't go on a long car trip because they just can't. They have to be near a bathroom at all times, or they won't go to a birthday party because they are not sure whether the food being served might trigger their symptoms and they have to just leave, and it's really hard to navigate the restaurant aisles, so it impacts our social life, it impacts our work life, having to just like stop what you're doing because you have to lie on the couch with a hot water bottle on your stomach, right. All those cramps. And and so the beauty of this process that I explain is that it really gives you that freedom. It helps you, find relief from the symptoms and be in control of them.
Now, how would our listeners, viewers, do you have a Facebook group? Do you have a website? How would they reach out to you and kind of do you have a form that they fill out, kind of giving you some indication of that they think they might have an issue? How do they reach you?
Yeah, if they want to reach me, I do have a website, and I have a contact form there. Also, they can what I offer is like a complimentary 30-minute consultation so that we can have that first conversation, right. And we figure out whether, that's the best course of action for them. I also have a free resource that I offer, and you can easily download it from my website, where, if you just want to, you're not ready to really completely overhaul your diet, going through this process, there are some things that you can do without, changing your diet to start helping decrease the bloating and maybe improve some of these symptoms that have to do a lot with how you eat, not necessarily what you eat. So that's something that's not talked about a lot, but it's important to do things like chewing your food well, eating, not in a hurry or on the run, but taking the time to sit down and eat with leisure.
What about eating fast?
Yeah, not eating fast, because
Yeah.
when you eat fast, you don't have time to chew your food well, and it's so important for proper digestion, and your digestion really starts in the mouth. So if you're digesting better, you're also less likely to have these symptoms. Also, if we're eating on the run, we're eating too fast, we're operating from that fight or flight response that most of us in our busy lives are operating from. And for proper digestion, you need to be in your parasympathetic system. You need to be in the rest and digest mode. And so just taking a break from work or whatever you're doing, sitting down, perhaps even going as far as doing some deep breathing before eating. That really calms your mind, switches you from the sympathetic to the parasympathetic system, and allows more blood to flow to your digestive system, and to really, improve the digestion of that meal. So yeah, there are a lot of things that we, are not so used to think about, because we go immediately, oh, I don't know, it was that ice cream that gave me the cramps, or it was that taco that really, sent me to the bathroom. But how we eat is also really important.
I mean, that's great. I mean, and a lot of people don't. I mean, they forgot, like, being around that dinner table, talking about the day, reconnecting with each other, because we all live very busy lifestyles, and we don't take that time. And that whole concept of like really gathering around the table and breaking bread together, literally, because everyone's scheduled. I gotta get this kid to soccer. I gotta go here for basketball. I got a meeting. I got a Zoom. Whatever it may be. And we really, really need to understand the beauty of eating, because it's an art, and really enjoy the food, but enjoy the company. And maybe that would slow down. Last question I have, Jan, would be to you about what would you say with all your clients and your clients over the years. If there is one food, now, I mean, I'm not talking about a food group, I'm talking about one food that you say, wow, that one really hits home to a lot of people that suffer from IBS, what would that food be?
Okay, you ask hard questions. I will tell you what the research shows. The research shows that there are two food groups that are the most likely to trigger the symptoms, which are wheat and the garlic and onion kind of group. So, yeah. But then again, I have plenty of clients who figure out, and they were sure it was the garlic, and then they're so surprised to figure out they could actually eat the garlic and the onions, and maybe it was the group that has the cauliflower and mushrooms in it,
Wow.
Because the thing is that we rarely eat foods in isolation, right? We don't eat a clove of garlic by itself. We'll eat foods that are prepared with garlic, and they have, meals with multiple ingredients. So it's really hard to tease that apart. So it's common for people to, blame one food or certain foods because they've never really gone through the process of isolating each food one or each group one at a time and figuring out what was the culprit,
Well, that's kind of good news, though, for a lot of people out there, don't you think, Jan? I mean, here you might think it's one thing, and it turns out that maybe it's either your portion control, or maybe it actually was something else that was associated that you would say, no way, Jose, it's not that.
Right, exactly. Think of me with, for instance, potato chips. Like if somebody told me I couldn't eat potato chips, not that I don't keep them in my house, but, I have often said that I cannot be trusted around potato chips. You eat a bag of potato chips, you're gonna get sick, right? So obviously I've made that association, but there's always that, the enjoyment factor. We so appreciate your being here today as our first guest of 2023. And of course, we will make sure that all your contact information is in the show notes. On that note, excuse me, this is Triumph Tuesday. And what are you triumphing over? What is one thing that you can do for enjoyment? And that maybe, since we're talking about food, tastes good. My name is Janice. And of course, we want to thank the amazing Antonella for being here today. We hope that you will definitely consider coming back and visiting us again and continuing the conversation.
I would love to. Thank you, Janice. It was a pleasure.
You're so
Awesome.
And again, my name is Janice, aka Wellness Diva 5.0. I'm with TwoSistas,
and this is Carol, so aka Naughty Boss. I am going to be triumphing over a couple things today, and we want you to know that when you're triumphing over something, it doesn't have to be this huge thing. It could be this small thing. It could be that you made your flipping bed today, right? Bravo to everyone who made their bed today. It's just about maybe you had to renegotiate, re-navigate, but you triumphed over it, and you deserve that pat on the back. So we are so excited. Thank you so much. You gave so much information. I think I added so much value to so many people that do suffer from this. We encourage all our viewers, our listeners to please reach out. If you've got any questions, she can guide you in the right direction for sure. We will see you tomorrow for Wealth Wellness Wednesday. Everyone have a great Triumph Tuesday, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
bye for now.